And up next is our session number 9, that's called Supply Chain Security, Addressing Cyber Vulnerabilities and Interdependencies. And please note, panel 4 will take place at Baroque Suite A, which is upstairs, so the other stage, talking about the challenges of artificial intelligence in digital societies, and it will be starting at 5 o'clock. And right now I would like to welcome the chair for our next session, who is the CEO of Cyber Trust Services and chairman of the cybersecurity platform of the Austrian government. Please welcome Mr. Thomas Stubbings. The stage is yours.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome from my side. I wish you a nice afternoon. Welcome to the session about supply chain security, addressing cyber vulnerabilities and interdependencies. First of all, I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists, and I would like to start with Mr. Eric Eifert, who is our only online panelist, and I don't know if we already have him. Is he already online? Good. Eric is Executive Director for Defense and Cyber at Beacon Red, which is a training and development capability company in United Arab Emirates. He has more than 27 years of military and civilian experience in information technology and cybersecurity. He worked previously as a senior vice president at Dark Matter and Mann. And Eric also had an honorable career as a special agent of the United States Air Force as a cybercrime investigator and taught graduate cyber investigations as adjunct professor at George Mason University. So welcome, Eric. Secondly, on the panel, and I'm happy he's with us here today, is Bob Hruska from SparxSystems. He's a principal consultant at SparxSystems Central Europe. He's a speaker and trainer with more than 20 years experience in software and systems engineering. He also contributed to the institutionalization of cybersecurity as a part of the software development lifecycle, very important thing, security by design. He's also experienced in the capability maturity model integration appraisal journey and development of new product introduction process. He also contributed to the cybersecurity profile developed by Sparx Enterprise Architect. Then thirdly, I'd like to welcome on the panel Thomas Mann. He is Chief Information Security Officer at K-Businesscom. You probably know KAPSH. So it was KAPSH before, and then it was split into two companies, and he is now with one part of this, which is K-Businesscom. He's also Group BCM Officer at K-Businesscom, and beside that, he is lecturer at the Master Study IT Management at the University of Applied Science, Wiener Neustadt. And he is also Information Security Lead Auditor for ISO 27000 and also for data center security. And last but not least, I would like to welcome Markus Klemen on the panel. Markus is Managing Director and co-founder of SBA Research with 15 years of work experience as IT security consultant and software project manager. He introduced and taught several lectures on IT security at the Technical University of Vienna before founding SBA Research jointly with Professor Armin Joa and Edgar Weipel, and he's also certified CSSP and CSSLP. So this is my distinguished panel. I'm very happy to have you with me to discuss today about the topic of supply chain security. Before I ask you for your introductory statements, I would like to have a few words to open the topic from my point of view. According to a KPMG study, only 18% of companies trust their suppliers. And on the other hand, and that's a study of EY, Cyber Attacks and Data Theft Study, only 41% rely on careful selection of their business partners, and only 58% have non-disclosure obligations for their business partners. So, on one hand side, very little trust. On the other hand, actually not a lot is happening. So there is obviously a big gap between the perceived threat and the actual consequences. And this is actually also one of the things we should talk about this afternoon. Large-scale cybersecurity supply chain attacks like NotPetya or SolarWinds, they have shown our vulnerability with regards to third-party risks. And it's not only the big ones, it's also smaller ones. For example, last year in Austria, we had a case where one weak company took 34 other companies with them as a supply chain incident. So it is a topic that affects every one of us. And also the lawmakers have picked up the topic and defined regulation about this. So you find it in the NIS directive. We just heard about the new version. Already the old version touched the topic, but the new version will deepen the requirements with regards to third-party risk management. And also other regulations like DORA, the upcoming financial markets regulation, will clearly stress the requirements there. So it will become obligatory to manage third-party risks. Know your customer, that was yesterday. Know your provider, this is today and tomorrow. So it will be necessary to have a good understanding of the cybersecurity posture of our suppliers and providers. But this leads us to a big problem. How to achieve this? Because there is very little transparency in the market about cybersecurity posture of suppliers and providers. Yes, I know there is the ISO 27000, and if a company can show this, that's a good thing, because it shows that this company has thought about and invested into security. But how many companies have that? And what do we do with all the rest of them? So there is a big gap. There are solutions coming up on the market, outside-in, scanning, using available data, public data, etc. The question is that enough? Is that sufficient? Will this save us from the next NotPetya, or do we need more? Do we need other approaches? So those are just a few questions that I would like to take into the forthcoming discussion. And with this, I want already to end my introductory statement and would like to hand over directly to my distinguished panelists to give their introductory statements. And first, I would like to ask Eric to give us your introductory words. Please, Eric, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Thomas. Can everybody hear me? Excellent, thank you. So one of the interesting things with this panel discussion is I've been dealing with this for my entire career. As a special agent in the Air Force, a lot of the investigations that we did had something to do with some sort of supply chain impact and supply chain risk. One most significant was we had a 5th generation fighter aircraft plan stolen from the defense contractor building it through a third-party contractor. And that had drastic impact on not only United States national security, but also global national security. Most recently, we've seen a lot of ransomware attacks being facilitated by third-party access, whether it was a trusted relationship or a third-party vendor that had credentials stolen. That led to ransomware attacks against organizations. So we're seeing a number of different challenges associated with third-party providers and suppliers. And that kind of leads me into what I want to talk a little bit about today, which I've been fortunate over the last 6 years to have been involved in a very interesting mega event called Expo 2020. And so Expo 2020 is basically a world expo that happens every 5 years. Previous one was in Milan. The next one's going to be in Japan. But basically, Dubai hosted the World Expo. It started last October and ended this most recent end of March this year. And of course, Dubai likes to do everything big, so they really wanted to break all the records and wanted to be the biggest expo of all time. And they accomplished that. So they had over 24 million visitors in person, another 20 million online. They had the most participation from any expo with 192 country pavilions. And they really focused on activities. So they had over 35,000 events over these 6 months. And the unique thing about this particular expo was they built it from scratch. So they built basically a smart city from scratch in the desert south of Dubai. So it had basically 4.5 square kilometers with over 120 buildings. And these buildings were smart buildings. So they basically built a smart city to host Expo. There's also a legacy component where this is actually going to be what they call District 2020, which is a new district south of Dubai as a smart city. And so this created a number of interesting cybersecurity challenges because they were dealing with innovation, new technologies, and trying to incorporate that all in this new smart city was one of our challenges. It also was an interesting opportunity because it was basically building a smart city from scratch where we didn't have any of the legacy challenges. It was truly a greenfield environment. And what we created was basically a new smart city that had all the features of transportation, e-government, healthcare, education. And this created some interesting challenges. There was a lot of interoperability and interdependencies between these different systems. And based on my experience with the Air Force, as well as some of the investigations I did, one of the concerns I brought to the table was the supply chain risk. And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to mitigate the risk of these third parties, knowing that we had thousands of different vendors that needed to work within different environments. And so how we create an ecosystem where we can actually do work, but still protect the Expo and the Expo systems from these types of attack vectors. So we actually took two approaches. One was the lessons learned from Lockheed Martin, where they created basically an ecosystem where vendors can interact, but it's segregated from the critical systems within the environment. So that's what we did. We create a vendor ecosystem where they can do their work, but it is isolated and separated from the critical systems within the Expo. The next thing we did, and really to address what we didn't know was going to be kind of a SolarWinds type of attack, was any type of hardware and software that was going to go into a critical Expo system went through a kind of a national laboratory test and validation. So we did vulnerability testing and validation that the hardware and the software was doing what it was supposed to do and didn't really introduce other challenges within that environment. So what we were able to do was really take a next generation innovative smart city and put security controls in place at the beginning in the design phase, which once again, because we had a greenfield environment, was a great opportunity to introduce some of these best practices. We looked at the zero trust model of don't trust anybody and validate and monitor everything. And that kind of led to how we approached the cybersecurity ecosystem. So what we wanted to do is create this kind of smart security operations center that had the zero trust methodologies in place. So we took some of the advanced techniques for SOC operations. So we looked at machine learning, we looked at behavioral analytics, security orchestration, automation, integrated threat intelligence to really provide what I would consider an enterprise cyber situational awareness. So we had visibility across everything from the IoT environments, the OT environments, your traditional IT sector. We had visibility into what the vendors were doing, how they interfaced with the pavilions, how they interfaced with the partners, and really were able to really scrutinize behavior and activities. And when there was anomalous activity that arise, we could very quickly investigate. And if it did turn into an incident, do incident response, remediation, and recovery to really prevent any type of cascading cyber event from cascading across other elements within the Expo space. And fortunately, now that Expo is over, I'm happy to report that we did not have any cyber incidents that were related to the supply chain. And so it does kind of validate some of the techniques we did of the zero trust model, of having isolated environments where the vendors can work without impacting the corporate environment, and then having kind of a robust vulnerability validation and vulnerability analysis process for various hardware and software technologies. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Eric, for this very interesting large-scale approach. I think that was a good opening. May I directly hand over to Bob for your introductory statement?
Absolutely. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So I'm here on behalf of SparxSystems Central Europe, which is a branch of a company which is based in Australia. We are from here, from Austria, located in Vienna. And why am I talking about that? Because we do have our tool, which is a model-based tool, and having a reach of over 1 million clients, we also have a great impact on educate our clients on cybersecurity, because for threat modeling, what is important as input is also to consider software architecture as well as system architecture, but every company is using a different approach for that, okay? So what we do, our customers happen to be, most of our customers happen to be from the automotive domain, and as you all know, nowadays vehicle is, when it comes to the vulnerability and when it comes to complexity, it's more complex than a space shuttle, because all the cars, they tend to be connected, they tend to have use the communication channels and share the information, therefore they can expose the vulnerabilities not to just within an enclosed network, but even outside the network, because you need to communicate even outside the network. So that said, me as a consultant guy from the field, we have the great opportunity to talk not only to the vendors of the vehicles, but also to the suppliers for the vendors. And as already mentioned, we like to educate people to institutionalize and to incorporate the cybersecurity by design into their system development life cycle. Also, having said or having mentioned the enterprise architect, I'm pleased to say that here is enterprise architect is used as the executive environment for this amazing tool ThreatGet, which is done by AIT. And this ThreatGet tool is even step forward, which is focusing on automatical identification of potential threats using already very complex based of a rule-based database which covers a concrete domains, automotive and some other ones. And this gives the great opportunity to become just about anyone, to become the cybersecurity expert in no time. So that's our aim, and that's how we would like to approach the whole situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. May I just directly hand over to the next one in line, Markus, please.
Sure, thank you. Thomas was talking about perceived gaps, and I would like to emphasize this, the perceived gaps between what the actual status quo is and where we wish it would be. So I Googled yesterday for job openings, and what I was Googling for was a supply chain security manager or a supply chain security expert. So how many openings do you think there are for those positions? Exactly, 3. Did you do the same search as me? Okay. So also interesting which kind of companies. So it was Google in the United States. It was Nike for some reason in Mexico. And it was the IATA, the International Air Traffic Association. So very distinguished companies and organization, and that's basically it. So that's the expert and the management level. As you might know, on the C level, so on the executive level, there has been the suggestion a couple of years ago that there should be a chief supply chain officer in a company, and this might be one of the most important roles there is in a company. Interestingly, the person that stated this was a logistics chief executive officer, logistics officer at SAP at the time. This was an article in Forbes. You can still read about it in 2016, back in 2016. So it's been a couple of years that this C role has been suggested. But it took another couple of years that Gartner went on the roll and on the same train, and now I think in 2021 they also pushed heavily for the role of a chief supply chain officer. Now in reality I've never met one. I don't know if you have ever met a chief supply chain officer. Success stories might be Tim Cook, the CEO of the most profitable company in the world. He has a strong supply chain background. And also Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors, also has a strong supply chain background. But those are just 2 examples, but it's not very widespread, and I would postulate that most companies are just starting to define the actual roles that would take over the issues or the challenges that we deal with. So we're still at a very early stage. I think the next step would be a rough risk assessment. So where are our major pain points, as you would do in any audit process? You try to get the quick wins. And I think that would also be a good strategy. This was one of the questions we had for our panel. What's a good strategy? Well, the first one is define somebody who's actually responsible and don't make it the CISO. The Chief Information Security Officer has enough on his or her plate and making secure that the security of other companies are ensured might be a little too much for him or her. Then the next step, I think, would be in terms of how quickly can we achieve something. As I said, one of the first articles was back in 2016, and not too much has happened since then. So I'm pretty sure that we will need regulatory frameworks to support or to incentivize companies to put more emphasis on those issues that are responsible for a safe and secure supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Markus. Thomas, please, for your words.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely correct. That you had a look on how many experts are needed for that topic. I just want to make a journey with you. I'm in the CISO role for several years, and what I see is that the aspects, the focus has been changed during the time. First time there were very technical aspects, making the network secure, making the client secure, and when you buy services and products, the more you buy, the more you find out that the quality of the supplier is really essential for your quality of service and project delivery. So what we did do in the past was to start a process where we say, okay, we need information about the quality of our suppliers, the certification. And mainly it was asking about the ISO 27001 certification. This was the first step. Then we found out this is not enough. We need more information. We need also qualified information about maybe vulnerabilities of the products. We need information about the service quality. If there is a cybersecurity attack on one of our service providers, so we need to know that. And this was one point where we started a project inside the company, and my luck was that I was not asked to be the leader of that project. So it was a dedicated department for partner and service management, and they built up a platform where the process from the onboarding to the step where the partner or the supplier from products is allowed to deliver services and goods to our company. And with that platform, we were able to monitor even the quality. And the next step was to find a possibility to get an automated way to get notified about vulnerabilities in the certain products we buy from that vendors. And it is not possible to search all the websites of your product, the suppliers of your products, for new vulnerabilities. So you need an API. So therefore, we built the next platform where we collect automated the vulnerabilities and map that to the CMDB of our own IT and also to the CMDB of our customer. So what I want to say is you need a structured approach. It's not a task centralized at the CISO department. Please do it because it's written in the standard and you're responsible for fulfilling that standard. So it's more than that.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, thanks to each one of you for the introductory statements, which were already very rich in content. So I think already from the first intro round, we have a couple of insights that we could take with us and use from separating providers from critical core areas, next generation monitoring, educating customers and vendors, to making someone responsible, and in the end to have a structured approach with a platform to monitor. So I think we already have a huge number of good ideas on the table actually before we really started the discussion. So maybe for the discussion one step back, I would like to ask each one of you, what do you actually see as the biggest risk in supply chain management, in third-party management? What is the risk that could happen from your point of view? You are all responsible for this area. What's your biggest fear with regards to that? I don't know, who wants to start?
I mean, I can answer the question. If we deliver products or services based on services or products where we have a hidden vulnerability where we don't know about, we could harm ourselves, we could harm our customer. And so transparency, that's the most important topic. We all know that the complexity of the systems is really high right now. So the likelihood that there is a vulnerability in the source code which is not transparent right now, it's very high. So one of the most important points is that if that vulnerability becomes transparent, that we get the information that we can steer the risk and that we can take mitigating actions.
Oh, I can go. Okay, so from my perspective, I believe that the biggest threat is for the supply, for the security supply chain, is that our third parties will build backdoors which might lead into some leakage, some stealing some information, intellectual property and stuff like that, so which quite matches with the transparency. So that would be the biggest threat to developing backdoors, which might lead to a leakage or entry to internal network or who knows what else, which might cause to destroy the whole reputation of our customers because we are the vendor, but even our reputation as the vendor. Okay, so this is a very important aspect from our point.
Thomas already mentioned in a side note, the point that I would have made, and that's the complexity of systems. You talked about the complexity of systems, mainly IT systems, but you know, in real world, or the real world is maybe even more complex. And if you rely too much on of the things that you have developed to cope with the complexities of the real world, you might wake up one day realizing that it didn't bring you too much. Just one example, you have multiple suppliers, so if one supplier cannot deliver, you have other suppliers. Well, who tells you that they are not sourcing from the same suppliers for themselves? For example, plastics for CPUs, you might be in the advantage position that you can actually choose from CPU producers. They all use plastic to cover their ICs. And there's one manufacturer of this plastic, that's a Japanese company. So if something goes wrong, and a couple of years ago there was a fire in the manufacturing plant, suddenly all the CPU producers lack plastic. As stupid as it sounds, it's one single source. So I think complexity is one of the most difficult things to actually deal with in terms of, because in supply chain management, suddenly the virtual world meets the real world. And I think we still underestimate how complex the real world is.
Eric, may I ask you?
Yes, please. Thank you. From my perspective, when I look at an investigation and do root cause analysis, what I find when it comes to third parties is they've often been given a position of trust where they have trusted access, a trusted relationship from a system standpoint, and not having the security controls to mitigate risk to that type of relationship. So oftentimes these third parties have direct access to do maintenance, to do purchasing, stuff like that. And the security controls that would normally be applied to the corporate environment are not extended to the third parties. So that creates a vulnerability, and if those third parties are compromised, then there's an easy access and easy attack vector in there. So one of the challenges that I see is really having that trusted approach without having the security controls in place to properly mitigate or monitor activity through that trusted relationship.
Thank you very much. That's actually a brilliant point that I would like to follow up on. You mentioned trust relationships. So we give our providers a certain trust advance. Yeah, we let them into our networks, we integrate them into our systems. But on the other hand, Eric, just like you mentioned, we do not apply, or we probably cannot apply the same rigorosity in security controls that we do internally. We all have our regimes, our policies, etc., but we usually cannot apply this to our providers. So what could be a way around? Because I mean, we need those providers, we need to integrate them to a certain extent. How can we bridge this trust gap? Are there any ideas that you could bring with you?
I mean, asking for certifications, like Cyber Trust or ISO 27001 is one possibility, where you get more information, more structured information, and based on that, you can establish the relationship for services and products. For example, I remember many years ago when we did do the first, when we bought the first software as a service for the company, and it was a very big American company, and I was asking for having a relationship to the CISO. Yeah? I would like to know who is responsible for that. Yeah? I don't want to write an email instant at the domain of the company. I would like to have a personal relationship with a phone number, with a person I can talk to if something happens. And I think that's really essential for a trust and a good business relationship.
Any other ideas? I mean, certification is for sure a good thing because it shows and the trusted third party has somehow done a review in which way whatsoever, but somebody looked at it. But how many companies have that kind of certification? And what do we do with all of the rest?
So I can add one
Yes,
piece
please.
to this, if you don't mind. So one of the things that we've seen across sensitive clients is they'll deploy a virtual desktop instance. So basically, you are operating under the security controls of the organization, and you're on your own laptop, you're on your own PC, but you're spawning a virtual desktop instance from the end user, operating under their security controls, their monitoring, but it still gives you access, safe access within their environment to do what you need to do. So that's one of the kind of technical implementations that I've seen across sensitive clients to mitigate this concern where you're still able to do your stuff, but it's through a kind of protected VDI instance.
I mean,
I think.
I mean, a lot of our customers have to follow the NIS directive. And one point in the NIS directive is that you have to monitor the quality of the suppliers. So they don't say that they have to have a certification. But if you look a little bit closer to that process, you find out that you have two options: asking for certification or doing a supplier audit. If you have to do a supplier audit, it causes a lot of effort, a lot of money, and a lot of time, and you don't have it. So in my eyes, the first step, asking for certification, there's no other possibility to manage that.
You want to add, Markus?
Yeah, I think as well that certifications are a good way to go. Of course, there are limitations, and we all know you can have a certificate and not have a clue what you're talking about if you just do cram sessions. But it's the closest thing we have to establishing trust, and at the end of the day, it's actually what matters. Because, I mean, we're now talking about suppliers, but we all have employees. And I have the same issue there, basically. I mean, I have to trust them to a certain degree. Of course, certain solutions like the virtual desktop that was mentioned, which is certainly a good approach, or the differentiation of duties so that you don't have too much administrative power in terms of IT administration in one hand, maybe approaches, but I would suggest that in most companies, basically you rely that your administrators aren't messing with your desktop and not installing things that you don't want to have. So I think to a certain degree we have to trust people in life. But of course certification can help to make it easier to do that.
I would add to that, certification is a quite nice identifier of the credibility which comes with it, but there might be a case, some certain case, when the certification is for some reason the supplier cannot prove the certification, but you still would like to establish a relationship with the concrete supplier. So you got two options. Option number one, which was already mentioned, you have to invest the time, money, people to, they say, look before you leap, to test it out, to perform all the security tests, and then to establish the trust between the two partners, or you apply some tools, some automation to that, and of course it depends on the security level what you want to reach, but it might imply that automation to this segment might help to establish a good relationship, good trust between supplier and the concrete vendor or producer without having the certification. So there will be.
May I follow up on that, because it's not completely clear to me. What do you mean with automation, and to which degree can you automate such a process?
Automation in terms of like penetration testing, penetration tests, and stuff like that. So this automation I had in mind.
Okay, but then probably again, you will not be able to do this with all of your suppliers. Yeah, I mean, there are companies who have hundreds or even thousands of suppliers. So then again, what to do? I mean, then you have to make a sort of categorization, or.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a very valid point. Of course, what there is not really any other advice. That might be an opportunity for some certain cases that this automation might lead to like bypass the certification need for this particular case, but as you mentioned correctly, it's not possible to completely forget about the certification and just do it on our own. So it's, I think, from case to case a different thing. As I mentioned, it also depends on how, on a security level, how secure the application or the system must provide.
So before we open to the audience, one last question that I would like to raise to this round is, Thomas already explained us about an example how it is done at K-Businesscom. I would like to ask the others if you would like to share. You're all in a company, you're responsible. How do you actually handle that? Is there something that you can share from your personal experience, how you take care that you only work with reliable providers? Anyone?
Okay, so we of course look at a certification. That's the approach. So our tool has to be really reliable and has to undergo all the certifications when it comes to cybersecurity and stuff like that. To our vendors, to our customers, we as a vendor, we recommend to implement a technique which is called reuse, buy, and make analysis, which is not just focused on whether they should consider third-party or in-house library, or for money or budget reason, but also to look at this aspect from the security point of view. So they have to consider: am I going to use a third-party library for this concrete implementation? Do we trust the supplier or we don't? If don't, then let us make our own. If we do, if they have the certification, so why don't we buy the third-party component from the provider rather than creating on our own and investing all that money and the internal procedure to get to the level of very similar to the third-party partner. So that would be it.
Markus?
So in my daily work, I would say that I have an approach that's very similar to what Thomas proposed. So basically, that you get to know your strategically important suppliers, if those are essential in terms of what you again provide to your customers, so that you get to know the people at the steering wheel, see how the company ticks, and just get a gut feeling, more or less. I think that's really one of the things that's underestimated and that no certification can replace. Of course, it always helps. It's good to have those, but I would never rely 100%. I would prefer having a good gut feeling than a certification, personally.
Eric, something you want to share from the practice?
Yes, love to. So go with the trust but verify. So what we do is a fairly comprehensive due diligence process where we look at the dark web, we do open source intelligence analysis to try to identify whether or not the supplier has any stolen credentials, leaked credentials, issues that would impact us as a business. So being able to kind of go through a robust due diligence process, even to the point where we actually do scanning of their public IP addresses to see if there's any known vulnerabilities associated with what they have. That gives us an indication on how their own security controls are and whether or not we can provide another layer of kind of trust to how they interface with us.
Excellent. Thank you very much for this. Thomas, you want to add something? Please.
One last statement from my
sorry.
side. Yeah. I always say reduce complexity. This is one of the most important topics, and provider risk management is one of the keywords I would like to bring in, because steering the effort, how much transparency you need to evaluate the risk. And this is one of the topics where we also steer how much information we need to qualify the provider. It's a difference if you buy some goods, or if you buy a service, or if you buy complex products. So provider risk management is one of the topics I would like to bring in.
Thank you very much. So at this point in time, I would like to open for questions from the audience. Please, Helmut has the first question.
What was the quickest one? So thank you very much for this interesting views also from Dubai. One element you didn't brought up so far, and I would like to ask from the other side, but just the question is whether you are sharing my view. On the other side, especially from a European perspective, we have so much SME push because a big portion of the industry are SMEs. We have not every supplier is yet now a digital service supplier. They have traditional products. If they are now combined with IT pieces, so they become digital, and they want to act as to be a supplier. So I guess not many suppliers for the Dubai case, I believe so, were able to achieve the expected level, because whether it's a system integrator which is checking the conformity, or we have a very strong certification approach, it puts a pressure on the supplier. Are the European SMEs prepared for this next level where much more expectation will be on the market, on their products, even it's the digital part only, with a good online product in combination? So I think there will be a huge threat for the whole European supply industry, for all the SMEs. So do you share this view? Do you see this? Or will they adapt to it according to normal market mechanisms?
Who wants to take this question? Or rather a remark, actually. But
well, I think that you're very correct that most SMEs are not prepared for this. I mean, we see it from our penetration testing. Not many companies have zero vulnerabilities, not to say no one. And I think this is, we're just at the beginning, actually. You know, everybody's talking about digitization, and SMEs are glad if they basically know how to use a web browser. But that's just the first couple of % of digitization. And I think that many of our hidden gems in Austria, their actual USP is their excellent IT. So that they can manage logistics, for example, on a level that not many competitors can because of IT. And I think that we could, you know, that we could become much better for many SMEs if we saw this as the opportunity to really differentiate ourselves from the rest of the herd.
any other questions? Yes, in the middle, somewhere in the middle.
Thank you. A very good panel, gentlemen, if I may say, with some very good thoughts. I will just share with you my concern or view. I would be happy to hear what you really think about it. Currently, I am with Huawei, right? So a company which knows a bit about supply chain being impacted and so forth, right? Previously, I was a CISO in many companies, including Orange, and in PwC, where I provided third-party risk assessment, vendor risk assessment as a service to the biggest companies. So I do have a bit of understanding of how it works. And I have a growing impression that we as a community, as industry, are actually barking under the wrong tree, because we are trying to build a process which by definition is aimed to establish a long-term trust relationship. And long-term trust relationships are, by definition again, a vulnerability from cybersecurity point of view. So actually we are taking, well, risk management in supply chain has its place because we need to do the due diligence to assure that the partner won't run away with our money, that has the capacity to deliver, etc., etc. But by extending this process to any sort of cyber risk, we are actually taking valuable resources from the places where they are really needed, and they are needed to verify the products, the services, and the people, because these are the only ways a service provider or a vendor can harm our organization from cybersecurity point of view. So actually what Eric was saying was resonating very much with me, right? Because the zero trust approach, without actually giving away trust too easily and focusing on actually what is the real threat coming from anywhere, including the vendor side, is what I think we should keep still in focus. Because what I'm observing, we are trying to solve mysterious supply chain risks with even more mysterious supply chain risk analysis.
Thank you for this very interesting question, interesting point. Question to the round, is a zero trust approach feasible?
I mean, the zero trust approach is very often used in network topology questions. On Monday, I had a discussion with other peers, other CISOs, and we discussed about that topic. So zero trust in network is not what you mean right now with the supply chain risk, I guess. But I think establishing the right trust based on transparency and the basement that the business partner has the same understanding of cybersecurity, what you need for your business, that's the right basement. I would not say that we have zero trust to our suppliers. I think we established the trust.
Why not? My argument is that we should, right? Because if, just giving an example, has any of your processes that you run within your organizations, right, or companies, risk management in supply chain, have excluded solar winds?
I mean, this topic was a really complex one. I remember when we were faced with that problem. One of the biggest problems was where is it in? Do we know all the products and services where we have that problem? And again, you will never have, you can never be sure that it will not happen to the vendor whenever you do any kind of transparency, any checks. You cannot avoid that. So that's my opinion.
I mean, I think we're coming back to the point. 100% security we cannot achieve. So the question, what is feasible with which effort? And I think we touched a lot of interesting points that can be used to, let's say, approach this question. I think nobody expected that we will solve the issue today here, this afternoon, although we tried hard. So let me thank you once again to all of my panelists. It was a great discussion. Thank you for being here. And due to time reasons, I have to close this session now. Thank you.